Welcome to the MEND, a podcast for survivors and victims of crime sponsored through the Center for Crime Victim Services here in Vermont. I'm Anna Nassett and will be your host today for this bi-monthly podcast and show. Today on the show we have Vermont State Representative Maxine Grad. This show was created to take a deeper look at services, organizations, and concepts for victims and survivors of crime. We want to acknowledge the healing process and provide resources, not only in our state of Vermont, but throughout the country, that could benefit victims and survivors of crime as they mend. As your host, I myself am a victim and survivor of crime, and my healing process and how I navigate the world through is an ongoing and ever-evolving process. I went for years of hiding myself and trauma to standing up and speaking out against crime, and now travel to speak with victim service providers across this country. I will share some of the services and resources I have used over the years as I've learned to mend myself and navigate these different paths. Our hope with this show is that everyone who has been a victim of crime knows they are not alone as they mend. And for those who work in this field, that you walk away with new skills, ideas, and knowledge. I want to begin, as usual, with a trigger warning. Our goal is to create a safe place to discuss topics of healing. But with that in mind, we may occasionally hear a story related to crime, discuss our mental health, or have other sensitive matter. We urge you to care for yourself and listen at your own discretion. Today, as I said, we have State Representative Maxine Grad with us to chat about victims' rights and laws here in Vermont and nationally. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. I met Maxine shortly after I moved here to Vermont. I was reading the news and saw that she had just gotten a bill passed that provided more protection for victims of stalking. Being a victim of stalking myself, who had just relocated to this state to find safety, I was really excited to see the work that Maxine had done. And so I sent her an email saying thank you. Well, much to my surprise, you emailed me right back, which was not something I knew from Washington State, and just kind of really impressed me and made me go, having just moved here, thought, I think this is a good place to be. Like, you can get involved really quickly, and that your representatives really care about your voice. So over the last 3 years, Maxine and I have developed a friendship. I've helped with her campaign a little bit, and she was able to have the State House here in Vermont do a proclamation honoring National Stalking Awareness Month in January, which was amazing, and I'm just deeply inspired and appreciative for the work you do for people in this community, within this state, and even nationally. Some of the things that you've passed have just really set a standard nationally. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So let's start off by talking a little bit about your history. What led you to running for office, how long you've been in office, just kind of how you got to this place where you're at.
Sure. So going on my 20th year in office, and like many women, I was asked to run. I didn't say, I'm going to run for office. I was always interested in policy. I still think of myself as a policymaker as opposed to a politician. I do have a law degree. I went to Vermont Law School. And I've always been interested in women's issues, women's health issues, and justice and access to justice. I also served on the first Center for Crime Victim Services Board, so the organization, the agency that is supporting this show. So that was, gosh, I was pregnant with my first daughter, so almost 30 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. So, so it's really part of my DNA, I think, in terms of crime victims issues and protections. Yeah.
When somebody asked you to run for office, what made you say yes, or take that shift in your path?
Well, it sounded like an interesting challenge, and I was like, Then I just did it. And actually the person who asked me said, oh, don't worry, you're not going to win, but just get your name out there. So,
and lo and behold, you won.
Right, and I did, right, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Maxine, I'm continually blown away by the work you do for victims of crime to pass bills, work for better safety, and be a leader in our state for victims of crime. Can you share with us how this became a passion and cause that you decided to champion for?
Sure. Well, thank you. So as I mentioned, I've always been interested in women's health, and I also, when I did practice law, I practiced quite a bit of family law. But I think really in terms of my women's health background, I remember in the 80s learning that the one thing that women all over the world had in common was domestic violence. And to me that was very significant. And again, regardless of income, all, ethnicity, all across the world, that was a thread. And I think that's when and at the same time, domestic violence and sexual violence was being seen as a public health issue, and really reframing it and helping. And I say women, it's not only women, but predominantly women survivors find their voices and get the help they needed. So I think that's where I started. Yeah.
How did the push go from domestic violence and sexual assault being a public health issue to a crime?
So I think recognizing that it really is a health issue, and so that more of a and I think when we start talking about public health issues, I think policymakers will see that it's the role of government or the law to protect those victims, and also I think in terms of public health, a lot of it was about access to health services and other services, and realizing that actually women that survivors do have a voice, they do have a role, and that they would get protection, whether it's by our healthcare system or by the law, but that it wasn't something that they brought on their own, which I think many victims, survivors feel like that.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Interesting. Sorry, I'm always learning too. So
Yeah,
I'm learning as we're all learning together through this.
Right.
So, so as you said, you have served here in Vermont for over 20 years. Can you share with the listeners how Vermont has progressed as far as serving victims of crime and how we stack up against other states?
Right. So I'm proud to say that Vermont is a leader in terms of other states, and we are victim-centered, which I think is very important for victims and survivors. And we'll talk a little bit later about what that means. But yes, really letting victims, survivors have a voice in the system, in their future, and in terms of access to justice. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that's awesome. Well,
yeah.
I know I can see that evidence for myself. Just even for those of you who know, I just went through a trial process, and it happened in Washington State, but the amount of people who stepped up here in Vermont, where this case had nothing to do with this state at all, to prepare me, to prep me, to just make sure that I had everything I needed before going out there to trial, was really just said so much to me about this state and how they see victims of crime and how they want to support them, no matter if it's here in the state or nationally.
Right,
So
right. Yeah, and I think also one thing that we, I see this as also not only a public health, but really a economic development issue, workforce development issue. And again, we'll talk a little bit later about some of the measures, but we have to protect our victims, because if victims don't have access to the court and don't have protection in terms of housing and employment, then they can't contribute to their family, society, the workplace, and we're all harmed because of that.
yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
I'd like to look at a few areas that have most recently changed in our state or are on the more national radar.
Right.
So let's start with a few things that you've worked on, like the removal of civil statute of limitations for child abuse victims.
Right.
That got passed this year. What happens now? Does it go far enough? Where are we at with that? And could you talk us through that?
Sure. So, statute of limitations is a time that somebody has to go to court and in the civil arena to sue somebody, and in the criminal arena, the prosecutor, the state, brings an action. So, and I think we looked at what was going on in terms of cases with priests and others, and saying, this is the time. Let's try to do something and give victims access to justice, because we know that so many adults were abused as children, and because the statute of limitations was 6 years, they really had no access to justice. So, what we passed this year is in civil law, and it's the statute of limitations. We lifted it so it's unlimited for child abuse, child sexual abuse. So I'm thrilled. However, I would like it to go further, not to be limited just to children, because I think they're victims of all ages. I think about 2 or 3 years ago, we lifted the criminal statute of limitations for sexual assault, and that includes all ages, and as well as child prostitution. So, and more and more states are moving that way, and I think it's really very important, because some victims take years. I think the average age is maybe 52 or something when a victim survivor
Wow.
begins to feel like he or she is ready to go to court, or recognizes. So even when we had a 40-year statute of limitation, it was limiting, and I think it's important that that access to justice is really, I think, part of the healing, and we heard that from victims.
Wow, that's a staggering age. Just to think about that, these people would have never had that option before.
Right.
I'm really glad that I've been looking a lot at what does justice look like to us,
That's a great question.
and it might not be a conviction, but being able to have that voice heard, being able to know that you're not alone, is such an important component to justice.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think sentencing, for instance, is one place where victims of crime, all crimes, can have a voice and really say what happened and how it affected him or her, and others.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that very well firsthand right now. So
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I would like to shift a little bit to another area that I know you've worked on, and that's around gun violence and prevention. And I know this is something that's huge on every one of our minds every day as we look at the news and try and navigate this world. What can you tell me that how we're at as a state, and then just nationally, what you think we should be doing, where we should be looking? I just saw today in the news that Walmart, I believe, has just said they're not going to sell ammunition. Is that correct?
That is correct. Certain ammunition, and I applaud that.
Yeah.
Just like Dick's Sports, I believe, stopped selling certain handguns or firearms, and their sales actually have gone up. So I think people appreciate that. I think Vermont. Let's see, a little more than a year ago, we did pass at that time, a comprehensive firearm violence prevention act. We certainly could do more. I would really like to build on that. One thing that I'm hearing and reading about in terms of any sort of thread or common theme with many of these mass murderers is a background of domestic violence or hatred, anger towards women. And so when we talk about root causes, I think we really need to look at violence against women, and look at are our laws as protective, preventative as possible. And Vermont has a very high rate of domestic violence-related homicides. And that's a real issue that I want to that I have worked on, and that I want to continue to work on.
Yes, absolutely. It's so important. I think there's 2 women who were murdered last year in Burlington, and both had gone and reported their, the domestic violence and everything, and then they ended up murdered. And I know that's something that's really dear to my heart as well.
Right.
As I look at these laws and I see, how they have kept me safe, and how so many people have worked to keep myself and others safe. And I think it's just so important that we continue to do that for every person in our state. So
Right. And one of the bills that that I have in my committee right now will have as part of a relief from abuse order, judges order that the firearms be removed. And while they can do that, they don't necessarily do that. Sometimes it depends upon the county. Vermont, we have 14 counties, so we have, in a way, 14 systems of justice. And I really feel that there needs to be consistency and consistent access to justice. So it's really getting those firearms out, making sure firearms are in the hands of who they should be and not in the hands of who they shouldn't be.
absolutely.
Yep.
Well, whatever I can do to help. We can kind of tie this into, like, we hear a lot about the intersection of mental health and criminal justice.
Right.
What does that mean for victims of crime?
Right. Thank you. So I actually, I just want to add one thing. When we are talking about gun violence, I want to make clear that mental health is not, the motivator contributor.
Exactly.
There may be mental health issues, but we need to understand that that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that I feel like that has been shown more light on recently, that the mental health is not the component for mass shooting.
Right.
There's so many people that live beautiful and brilliant, healthy lives.
Right.
That have a mental health condition.
Right.
So,
Right.
Yeah.
Or domestic violence. The same thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're talking about anger.
Yes.
So anything. Right. So the intersection of criminal justice and mental health is a tricky one. And I think, and it's something that I'm working on currently and will continue to work on. And I think in the criminal realm, we have victim notification. So if a victim requests it, and that's, hearings, change in placement, those types of things. In the mental health area, we don't have that, and we're hearing that it's because of privacy and HIPAA and other laws, which certainly I understand and I respect. That being said, though, a committee that I serve on, the Joint Justice Oversight Committee, we're looking to see how exhaustive are those laws. We do hear that other states do have victim notification in the mental health arena. So, seeing if there is some way that we can legally give victims more notification, more feeling of empowerment in that process.
Awesome.
So
that's a really good thing.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. So a year or so ago, the Sexual Assault Victims Bill of Rights was passed. Can you share more about this and the national organization that is working with each state to get this piece of legislation passed? 'Cause
Right.
I'm very passionate about this, and I know this is something that you helped have happen as well. So
Right. Well, that was great. The organization is called RISE, and So one of the main components is making sure that the sexual assault exams are free or affordable to victims, because what we are hearing is that a lot of victims, well, first they would go to the hospital and they would be sat down with a nurse, so a SANE nurse, which is the sexual assault nurse examiner, very specialized nurse, and have to go through the paperwork regarding payment, and nowhere else does a healthcare provider do that. Okay, usually it's an administrative person or somebody the door before, right? This is during the exam, so that in and of itself was very intimidating, very difficult for the nurse, and also either insurance didn't cover it, or if they did, it was prohibitive, and so there were victims, sexual assault victims, that were not getting the proper exams and certainly not getting access to justice. So through the law, we made sure, with the help of the Center for Crime Victim Services, that insurance would cover it, or if not, that there would be a fund, and so that the victims didn't have to worry about that, because these barriers really re-victimize the victims.
Absolutely.
Right, and so it was removing that that very important barrier. So, and then created a study looking at the exams and looking at the nurses and really making sure that they have the that they have the resources that they need. So
Awesome.
yeah.
And RISE is the national organization, and that was started by Amanda.
Wong, I believe. I'm not
Okay.
sure if I'm pronouncing it right.
Okay.
Right. Who was a survivor herself, and
Yes.
she did an amazing work in Congress and got almost a unanimous bill in terms which was like unheard of in those times to get such a bill through. So yeah,
That's incredible. Yeah, I'm really inspired by her work.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about what else has been passed in this last year?
Right. So as I mentioned, there are other barriers that have been in place that we're trying to remove for victims. So for instance, employment, going to court, the fact that often victims are not given time off to go to work. From work to go to court, or if they do take the time off, they might be retaliated against. They might lose their jobs. So in terms of anti-discrimination, we created law that so that victims would be able to go to court and not be discriminated. Also, the same thing with housing discrimination. Housing is very, very difficult for crime victims, and they're often their children. So again, the new law would allow victims to terminate their lease, change their locks, have their rental unit changed. Under certain circumstances. Certainly they would have to show that they were victims. But again, another protection. And victims often have to move, unfortunately, for their own safety.
Yeah.
As you know.
As I know very
Right,
well.
right. And a lease.
Yeah, and that housing
yeah.
component is huge. I mean, for myself over the years, I would always, once I signed my lease, let my landlord know, like, if you ever see this name of this individual or hear of them loitering around, you need to let me know. And the same with employment. Like,
Right.
I've definitely lost a lot of work over the years and been penalized.
Right. Right.
And, those parts, it's so frustrating because you as the victim, suddenly you're considered not safe. And so, an employee might not want you, or employer might not want you there, housing might not want you there. Or you are retaliated because you have to take off time and you're already losing income from all of the emotion that's happening.
Right.
So
Right.
I'm really like these two pieces I just think are so important for anybody moving forward with
Right.
their life to have those very, very basic, absolute necessity things covered.
Right. And it is it's unpaid time. We're not expecting
Yeah.
the employers, but again, at least victim won't be discriminated against. The other thing is if a victim if a child is born as a result of human trafficking, then the perpetrator, the trafficker, cannot ask for parental rights and responsibilities. One would think that's a no-brainer,
But it's not.
But it's not, and
Yeah.
and actually, I think there's federal law on that, but we didn't have state law on
Okay.
that, so we wanted to be consistent with that, and actually. Having that law tied into grant money, federal grant money. So.
Great.
And we also have something similar to that for sexual assault. If a child was born as a result of sexual assault, same thing. The perpetrator cannot have parental rights and responsibilities.
Good. Whatever we
So-
can do to protect folks is
Right.
important.
Right.
What I think we're kind of looking at, like, what issues do you have to help? Are you hoping to work with on the upcoming session, which starts very soon? Correct.
Right. And officially in January.
Okay.
We're all sort of in the planning session and working with
Yeah.
our various different partners, the stakeholders now. Certainly, I want to continue on firearms and violence prevention. So specifically looking at relief from abuse orders and removal of firearms. Also, housing for victims. I know that there's been talk about setting up some sort of fund or something, for housing, and that's not really in my wheelhouse. Different committee, but it's something that's certainly I know it's been a priority for the advocates. I think.
So I'm writing
So
that down
far.
because I'm really excited about the housing portion.
Right. Right.
Would like to be involved in that. So, Maxine, let's see here. How do we as citizens get involved in working on legislation or bringing issues that pertain to victims to the table?
Well, you're a great example. Email your legislator, or if there's a, even I, as chair of the House Judiciary Committee, I hear from a lot of people, even though I'm not necessarily their representative, but I would say, reach out to legislators, reach out to organizations like the Center for Crime Victim Services, like the Vermont Network Against Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence, and just say, find out about them, say I'm interested.
Yeah.
And
what can I do? How can I? Yeah.
Yeah. What's available in my area, and I think it'll be greatly appreciated.
Yeah. Like I said, just you talking about housing for victims of crime, like I immediately made a note. I'm like, I need more info on that. I want to know who's in charge of that. I want to be involved in that.
Right. Well, the network is a great place to start. And then come to the State House. It's the wonderful thing about the Vermont State House is it's open. Walk in anytime, and
awesome.
Come find us.
Awesome. Yeah. I apologize to our listeners. I'm getting over a little cold. Well, thank you so much. As we wrap up this episode, I know that we've barely begun to scratch the surface of issues, but is there anything you'd like to share that we haven't chatted about yet?
I don't think so. I think you did a great job at at covering the bases, and then I'm just looking forward to continuing to work with you and others. And there's always more to do.
Awesome.
And I can't do it without you and other advocates and other survivors. It's really important to have that dialogue and that experience that you bring.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's an honor to be in your district, for sure.
Thank you.
Maxine, it has been such an honor to have you here today. The work that you've done for the state of Vermont is profound. Like we've talked specifically about victims' services and rights today, but I know that your work covers so many other areas. You've worked on, eliminating the statute of limitations for sexual assaults, protection against sexual harassment in the workplace, the Sexual Assault Bill of Rights that we talked about, parentage law, employment protection for victims, removal of firearms for domestic violence scenes, and so much more. I know I am safer for the work that you do, and I know that my voice is heard because of the person that you are.
Right. Thank you.
For me, personally, getting to sit and interview is an absolute honor, and knowing that I get to sit with somebody who's passed laws that could potentially save my life is really... that's a hugely humbling thing. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
I want to close each show with a positive message. So if there's one parting thought you could share with victims and survivors of crime, what would it be?
That you're not alone, and that there are advocates and others that are here for you. Your voice matters, and that we're here to stand with you and listen to you and help you be strong and find your strengths. So.
Awesome. Well, I know you do that in all of the work that you do.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for being here today, Maxine, for talking about victims' rights and laws in our state. To everyone listening, write your state representative. They might just write you back. And if you have any ideas or questions for shows coming up, you can contact me at anna@standupresources.com. I'm your host, Anna Nassett, and I look forward to sharing more with you every other week here on the MEND. Be well, be strong, and thank you.